Hopefully the lighting here is okay. Looks like it might be a little bit intense. I don't know what I'm saying half the time, but this is what I do. Good morning, everyone. So glad you're back. Unless you're new to the channel, you know that I freaking love tarps. They have tons of livable space underneath where you can cook, change, hang out. You can even bring friends under. And living in the Pacific Northwest here, where it's pretty much always super high humidity, they're also very resistant to condensation, which is awesome. Not to mention the great views. You wake up in the morning, you actually see the sunrise, you can see animals when they're passing by. It's very cool sleeping under a tarp. And let's not forget the most important part, they're just a ton of fun to set up. And I've made lots of videos on tarp camping at this point because it's just a genuinely enjoyable hobby and I like to share it with others. But lately I've actually been taking a single walled tent out with me on most of my adventures, and it's not because I enjoy using a tarp any less than I used to, but I've just been finding it to be a better tool for the conditions that I normally encounter and my current style of hiking. So with that, I want to go through 5 reasons why I made the switch from a tarp to a single walled tent for most of my adventures. Number 1 is versatility. I'm really making a concerted effort to get out more often and really go backpacking as often as possible, even in poor weather and things like that. And I really wanted something that I could just leave already packed up in my pack so that I could just grab it and go whenever I get the itch to go on a backpacking trip. And with a tarp, as much as I love them, there's often lots of decisions to make before you go out. Do I need a bivvy? What kind of bivvy? Bathtub floor? How many trekking poles? Am I gonna take 1 or 2? How many stakes do I need? And while I'll concede that it's definitely not rocket science to pack for a tarp camping trip, it's definitely much easier just to grab a tent and go. A single wall tent, which in my case is the Zpacks Plex Solo, has 4-sided protection, bug protection, and a bathtub floor to protect from pooling rainwater. So it can handle most of the conditions that I'd expect to see on a normal trip without any additional thinking. It's also much more forgiving in bad weather. All of this may seem relatively minor in the grand scheme of things, but what it all comes down to is that easier packing means that I'm more likely to go out on a whim. Point number 2 is that it's essentially the same weight as a tarp plus a bivvy. Something that you'll often hear is that the whole point of a tarp is to save weight, not necessarily to be luxurious. Although I would argue that you can definitely still get a very good night's sleep under a tarp, but for the most part that sentiment is true. Tarps are meant to be relatively Spartan and not necessarily the most comfortable things in the world. But with today's single walled tents, tarp systems can actually be heavier if you need bug protection or splash protection. So with a tent, you're not only getting a cozier setup in some cases, but you also might be saving a little bit of weight depending on what additional add-ons you need for your tarp to meet the conditions that you expect. For instance, if I was worried about insects, my tarp plus a bug bivvy is about 13 ounces, whereas the Plex Solo is 13.9, but it's much easier to set up and it has way more livable space inside than a bug bivvy. And at some point you'll even start saving weight. For instance, if you need full splash protection, so you want to go with an actual water resistant bivvy instead. I will admit the weight savings can get a little bit fuzzy depending on how many trekking poles you intend to take with your tarp. With my single wall tent, I definitely need to take at least 1 pole of some kind, whereas with a tarp, you can string it up between 2 trees. That said, I found that anytime that I'm expecting rain with my tarp, it is nice to take poles so that I can actually choose my location and not have to pick a spot that's necessarily between 2 trees, just because inevitably that's going to be the spot that has a rut in it that's going to fill up with water. I don't know why it always works out that way. I guess that I'm just lucky. So all of this being said, one of the challenging things about minimalist backpacking is realizing when you're clinging to things just because you really like them, even though there are better and simpler options available. And that's how it was for me. I identify as a tarp camper, so it was really difficult to accept the fact that there may be better options out there and that a tent might actually make more sense. In some cases anyway. I am all for using a tarp when it makes sense. This means mild weather, no bugs, low impact campsites, and 1 or no trekking poles needed. The thing is, those types of trips just don't present themselves to me that often. Reason number 3 is critters, or mini bears, if you want to call them that. I think mice are absolutely adorable. I don't think it's adorable when they're chewing through my stuff. I tend to camp on relatively high-use trails most of the time, just because I really don't always have the time to drive out into the middle of nowhere to go backpacking. And honestly, critters are just a huge problem where there tends to be lots of people camping. When I'm sleeping under a tarp, it is not uncommon to have mice scurrying over me all night long and trying to chew on things that I've sweated on. So my backpack straps, my socks, my shoes. I mean, I'm backpacking, so pretty much everything is covered in sweat. What really sealed the deal for me though, in terms of this I don't know, phobia, if you want to call it that, is I was actually out backpacking with my buddy Craig, and we woke up under our tarps one morning, and Craig had a hole in the footbox of his sleeping bag, and all of the down had been ripped out of it. And now this was fall, so it was pretty cold out. And if it hadn't been the last day of our trip, that would have been a complete trip ender. At some point during the night, a mouse or a squirrel or something had decided that his sleeping bag smelled or tasted good and just ripped the shit out of it. Ever since then, I am always on the lookout for things that want to eat my stuff, and I'm always trying to figure out ways to make that not happen. With a tent, I can bring all of my stuff in and sleep soundly knowing that I don't have to worry about mice chewing through my stuff, and I don't have to be fending off my gear from them all night. This may sound a little bit dramatic, but seriously, the last 5 trips that I have gone on, I have had mouse problems. And look, there's still the chance that they'll eat through the mesh on the tent too, but at least it's a little bit of peace of mind, and it's way less likely that they'll get to my gear in my tent than they would if it was just sitting on the ground outside. All right, reason number 4 is repeatability and efficiency. Part of the fun of tarps is that there is a nearly infinite way of setting them up, and I think that that's what draws a lot of us to the craft in the first place. I can lose myself for literally hours, messing around with different configurations and trying to get the perfect pitch on my tarp. The thing is, that's not always a great thing when I want to hike all day and then roll into camp in the dark. A tent, on the other hand, has just one way to set it up, so muscle memory can take over and I can have it up in a few minutes. I mean, look, I can probably have a tarp up in a few minutes too, but it's gonna be kind of a gross pitch. It's not gonna look nice, it's probably not gonna be very storm resistant, and it's probably gonna be in a crappy location. Using a tent after a long day of hiking really just kind of streamlines the whole end of day process, because site selection tends to take a bit longer with tarps as well. Unless I want to take 2 poles, which pretty much kills the weight savings of a tarp at that point anyway, I need to find a spot between 2 trees that are just the right distance apart, and that spot has to be perfect, right? No roots, no depressions that are going to collect rainwater, and often it can take quite a while to actually find a good campsite for a tarp. So while site selection and setting up a tarp is all a fun and enjoyable part of the whole process, right now I'm more focused on longer days on trail and less focused on camp chores. Both parts of the experience are equally valid. This is just where I'm at right now. And finally, at number 5, we have privacy. I am not particularly shy. I run a YouTube channel where I talk about bidets, but I often camp near other people when on trails, and I try to make sure that the people that are camping around me are able to enjoy their experience and feel safe. Part of that is not showing them my bare ass whenever possible. Look, nudity is natural and I have no personal issues with it, but I try to put myself in the shoes of the person one campsite over that might be on their first backpacking trip and is on high alert for creeps in the woods. The nice thing about a tent is that I can change without mooning passersby, and everyone gets to enjoy their time in the woods just a little bit more. So there are the 5 reasons why I'm switching from a tarp to a single wall tent as my primary shelter. I will still use a tarp because I absolutely love it, but only under very specific conditions. Low use campsites, which means less mini bears and better drainage, good weather, and minimal bugs. Or maybe I just want to go use a tarp because it's fun, but the default is now a single walled trekking pole tent. For all you diehard tarp users, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Everyone else, feel free to chime in as well. It's always nice to hear from you. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.